I really enjoyed our conversation today with Stacey, where she does education and self-awareness with people who are looking to potentially be prospective franchise owners. I thought that was great, John. And both of us being former franchise owners ourselves, there's much of what she said we could relate to.
Yeah, no doubt. Stacey was the CEO and founder of Franchise Prep Academy, and we talk in this episode about the assessments she does to evaluate how a newbie entrepreneur can really evaluate where they want to go from a core competency, motivator, risk assessment. She also understands the 4 whys of entrepreneurs. Really interesting content.
I loved her take on the 4 categories of why and exploring those with people, and then knowing that different businesses support different whys. Let's get right into it. Here's Stacey Marmolejo. Stacey, welcome to the Entrepreneurs United podcast this morning.
Thank you so much. I love this show, so I appreciate being on.
Thanks. You're a fan also, it sounds like.
I am.
That's nice.
Hey, all of us entrepreneurs have to stick together, and we can all learn from each other.
That's right. Well, walk us through some of your past. I know you were a franchise owner and now you're doing franchise consulting. And can you walk us through some of your journey and how you came to arrive at where you are today?
Absolutely. So my father was in the military. I come from a 10-generation military family.
Wow.
So they were very disappointed when I didn't join. My brother joined, but I didn't. And my mother was actually even the child of a military person. So that's all she knew. So she was so concerned that I was going to not have security in life because I didn't join the military. So what I really wanted to do in college was be an entrepreneur, but I knew that was not going to fly. So I went to work in the corporate world. And like most entrepreneurs, I climbed the corporate ladder and I still wasn't fulfilled. I was the senior vice president of a national company making 6 figures back in the late 80s. It was just, it had everything. I liked my work. I liked the people, but it still wasn't that itch that I'd wanted to scratch since college. So at 45, I had one son. He came home. He was in first grade. And he said, I want to learn to play the piano. And so I called the guy from the church and said, do you teach piano? And he said, yes. So my son started going to weekly piano lessons. And then when he was 14, so 7 years later, he stuck with it. He was like, I want to learn to play the guitar. So a camp came through town and it was a rock and roll camp. Well, 14 years old, he was playing guitar. He was all excited. So at the end of the camp, they actually played in the venue that Prince made famous in the movie Purple Rain. So the whole experience was way cool. So he was like, man, I'm just bummed I have to wait a year to do that again. And I said, there's got to be some place you can do this. And we couldn't find one. So I went online and I found the Paul Green School of Rock in Philadelphia. And they said, well, we're getting ready to sell franchises if you're interested. And that's how I became a franchise owner. Not the path I would recommend, by the way. So 16 years later and having owned 3 locations, I've sold them all. And I was going to retire, actually. And I walked around my house for a couple of hours or a couple of days, and I was like, man, I am so bored. What do retired people do? So I called my brother, who's older than I am, and he said, well, I play golf every day. And I was like, I don't play golf. So I was talking to a girlfriend, and she said, well, because I was on the franchise board for the School of Rock Franchise Association. And a friend of mine said, well, you've helped so many people as they started up a School of Rock. Why don't you just help people understand franchising? So I was like, that's interesting. So that's what I started doing, and I absolutely love it. I like to say franchising is the original done-for-you business. And it is the perfect first business. If you have an entrepreneur who wants to have their own business but's never owned a business, a franchise is the perfect way to go. I don't sell franchises, by the way. We have franchise consultants who represent a catalog of franchises that they can introduce you to the franchisor, and the franchisor pays them commission. I am working on behalf of the entrepreneur. So we do education, we do self-awareness, things like that, so that the entrepreneur is the focus. And then when and if they are ready to buy a franchise, then I will introduce them to some different franchise consultants who can take them to the next step of the journey.
Okay, good. Thanks for that background.
Yeah.
You had said your mom was concerned about you not having security because you
Yes.
weren't going to go into the military. Can you speak to what you experienced in the way of a security or lack of security as an entrepreneur yourself?
So I like to say that people think that being an entrepreneur, owning your own business is riskier than having a job. And I think it's the absolute opposite, actually. And I didn't realize that until I had had both. But in corporate America, you're just going along, you're thinking everything's fine until you get the Friday afternoon call to the boardroom or the conference room, and the HR person's there. And then you're like, uh-oh, right? And you didn't see it coming. Whereas as an entrepreneur, if you're having down times, you know it. And if you're paying attention, you see it coming and you can make adjustments. So yeah, there were very tough times. There were times that I had to dig into my own pocket to boost up the business a little bit. And that's part of what we talk about at Franchise Prep Academy, because when I bought my first, no, I bought the franchises, but when I like built the first one, it's not an inexpensive proposition. It's about 300 to 400,000 to do a build out for a music school because of all the sound, right? So being a naive, not knowing anything about being an entrepreneur, I said to myself, well, I read that you have to have skin in the game. So I emptied my 401k, I borrowed against my house, I did, all that stuff. And I built this first location. And my idea was, then when I was ready to open the second location, I would go to the bank and I would say, look how well I've done. I did this all with my own money. And now I'd like a loan to open location number 2.
Yeah, of course.
And I was banking at, can I say which one?
Sure.
I was banking at US Bank,
Okay.
right? So they had been with me the whole time. They were seeing the growth of my business. But when I went to ask for that second loan, they told me, well, no, this is a different business. You have to have skin in this game. And I said, but it's the same business, just another location. And they said, we don't see it that way. So you're going to need to put 30% down. Well, all the money was tied up in this first location. So I started shopping banks. And one thing I learned is local banks and regional banks are much more small business friendly than the nationals. And I found a local bank, and they were willing to loan me the money for location number 2 based on the activities of location number 1. And that's when I realized that when you hear that phrase, other people's money, use other people's money, it is so true. So in hindsight, rather than putting all of my money into location 1, I should have put the requisite 30% down, gotten a loan for the other 70%, paid off that loan, and then if you're in that position and the money's not coming in like you expect it to, you still have your own money to tap into. But if you use all your own money to open location number 1 and then it doesn't go as planned, where are you going to go for that money? So that would be, like you were talking about struggles as an entrepreneur. It's the biggest struggle is what you don't know. It's also the biggest motivator, but
Yeah. And you had said you rose to the ranks of senior vice president of a national company. You were 45. That didn't really take care of the itch that you wanted to scratch since college. The reason I want you to expand on that is our audience has varying people. Some entrepreneurs that own a business, some are looking into owning a business, and some are intrapreneurs. They're very entrepreneurial within a job. Can you speak to, I assume as a senior vice president of a national company, you were kind of an intrapreneur. You had some freedom of where you spent your time and your schedule and so forth, but that wasn't enough for you. What was the itch that you wanted to scratch that role did not satisfy, that ultimately you got satisfied?
Yeah, great question, because I was an entrepreneur. And as a matter of fact, my boss, by the time I left corporate, the boss that I had known him for over 20 years, and he and I are still really good friends. So he recognized that my interests and my skill sets were in building. So in fact, that was my entire job in that company, was whenever anything was, they were ready to build something new, they put me in charge of it. So that I learned a lot, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. Part of the itch that wasn't being scratched was I was coming up with multi-million-dollar ideas, and that money was going into somebody else's pocket. And I was like, I'd like multi-million-dollars coming into my pocket. So that was part of it. But the other part of it was I was doing it for somebody else. There was this entire safety net if I failed. It wasn't 100% mine. I had to get consensus on decision making. And I had a lot of experts around me. I had IT experts, HR experts, marketing experts, So that's very different than, okay, go start your own business with all your own money or your own loan, make all your own decisions, and see if you're still as good as you think you are. So that was kind of the challenge that I needed when I left corporate to start my own business. But again, now looking back, and now I truly am starting a business from scratch, right? So the journey from corporate to franchise to true entrepreneur starting from scratch, all three are very different, and they do serve a different fulfillment.
So was that itch about wanting to experience risk and independence and a test of yourself?
Pretty much, but I'm too afraid to bungee jump or zip line or
Sure.
skydive.
You're good with financial risk, but not physical risk. I'm
There
a
you
team
go.
spirit. I'm the same
I can
way.
always bounce back from bankruptcy. I can't bounce back from death.
That's a good point. I was going to challenge that for a second, because when you talk about risking it all in that first business, I mean, that's bungee jumping to me, and putting it all on black and going, all right, I'm going with all my feet and I'm going all the way in. And by the way, I just want to make a quick comment. I loved your statement about, so many times we talk to entrepreneurs and they're banking with Bank of America or TD Bank or whomever, and they're a number. They're an absolute
Exactly.
number. And when you build credibility and relationship with a local or regional bank, it's so powerful, because they get to learn more about you, your business, your successes. And if ever you do run into a roadblock or whatnot, they're there for you because they've actually been with you for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years. And
Exactly.
I think entrepreneurs today really don't understand the value of those relationships. And way too many are banking with way too large of organization for the size of their business, that it does not make any sense. So if you're an entrepreneur listening to this and you're a number at a bank, get out of there now and go establish a really good relationship in your local community. I think it's a phenomenal piece of feedback. In addition to, not all leverage is bad. It's bad when you're over leveraged, but to get the proper amount of capital so you're not putting yourself in that bungee jump position is great feedback as well.
And John, that's probably at risk even more in the next generation. That is text message. Let's not even use complete sentences or actually spell out the word. Let's communicate quickly. Let's minimize face to face, because there's a different feeling when we're at risk face to face than sending an email or a text. Like that relationship building, I think is an art that may be getting lost.
I think that's a really good point, because one of the things with the small independent bank that I went with, I had to send in my monthly financials to them because I had gotten that loan from them. So you can't be uncomfortable sharing the truth with your banker, because my banker in this small independent environment was actually instrumental in teaching me some things, because he took the time, because he wanted me to succeed. And it did feel like I had a CFO on my side to a certain
Was it
degree.
the local bank, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to get that with a national bank where you're basically getting free education based on the relationship, and they're interested in you, not just the numbers you can produce for their business, i.e. the bank.
Well, the other thing is, with a large bank, if you're an entrepreneur, you are going to get the most junior person they have, if you get anybody. And those junior people turn over a lot, because they're all looking to climb their ladder in their corporate career. So it's not unusual to go from US Bank to Wells Fargo to, I don't even, does TCF even still exist? I don't know. But, so I'm still with my little local bank. And I still, even though I sold that business and I'm starting this new one and I don't need to borrow money, I'm still having lunch once every 3 months with my banker and talking about business and kids and, so I won't say he's a friend, but he's more than an acquaintance or more than a business banker to me.
Well, certainly a great commercial for local and regional banks, here, because I think we can all agree that relationship, getting that free consultation, because you have somebody else that's in your corner that has a vested interest in your business, but they're not controlling your business. They're advising you, and they want to help you. So I love everything about that. And
also, by the way, just one last thing, a great resource. So if you have a banker, a local banker, and you're not happy with your accountant, or I outgrew my first accountant, right? So who did I go to say, hey, do you know any accountants for my level? The banker.
Yep, absolutely, absolutely. And not to get too far down this road, because I want to change subjects for a second, but if you want to continue to grow your business, do acquisitions, expand to new locations like you did, boom, you have somebody who now understands you, understands your business, understands your model, understands everything about you. They want to help you grow because they want to lend money, and it works best. So love all of that. Stacey, I feel we got a serious issue going on in our society today. And
I smiled because I thought you were going to say you have a serious issue going on with Stacey or something Stacey said. So I was like, oh boy, where are you going next here, John?
Ooh, put me on the spot.
I think that the three of us, as well as others, are potentially contributing to the issue, which is we are so pro-entrepreneurism. We're sitting here right now, and this is me too, saying, you know what? Corporate jobs, really not a good idea. Go start your own business, right? Young entrepreneurs, young folks are watching TikTok, they're watching Instagram, whatever else they're watching, and the glamour of being an entrepreneur and controlling your own destiny is very, very strong. The society now where you can work for yourself, you can be an Uber driver, you can be, you can do whatever you want. You don't have to go get a job at Starbucks. You don't have to get a job at the School of Rock. You don't have to get a job at McDonald's. You can go start your own thing. Is contributing to a staffing related issue. And so I'm a true proponent that being an entrepreneur, just like yourself, is the ultimate form of security. I think it's going to lead to another issue, which is nobody wants a job anymore. How are you dealing with that with some of the franchises that you're consulting with? Because I think that's going to become a bigger and bigger issue, is there's going to be a lot of companies, not a lot of employees.
That's a great question. And I just said that to a friend the other day. I was like, I feel like we're going back to the Wild West, where either you're trading goods or you own the car dealership and I own the tire company, and it's like everybody owns one thing in this small town. That's what it feels like it's coming to. But I don't think first of all, I don't think entrepreneurship is for everybody. I read an article the other day that suggested that parents buy their kids a franchise instead of sending them to college. And it sounds great, but even a franchise can't teach an 18-year-old with no business experience how to be successful, in my opinion.
Okay, right? Now I'm going to challenge Stacey. So,
but hang on, not yet. But I don't work for the franchise side. I work for the entrepreneur side.
yep. Well,
So
let me
if
share this with
somebody
you,
comes to me
Stacey.
and says, I want to own my own franchise, I want to own my own business, right? We start with 3 assessments. We start with a core competency assessment, and then we do a motivator assessment, not motivation, but a motivator. Like, how do you enjoy spending your workday? And then we do a personal financial statement. Based on the outcome of those 3 things, then we can start digging into what are your options. And truthfully, I kind of made fun of the 18-year-old, but there are franchises. You could be a pooper scooper franchise. Don't laugh. The dirtier the job, the more money it makes.
So, Stacey, let me share this story with you because I don't believe you know this. Although Rich and I did go to college, we did own franchises in college and separately. We didn't even know each other when we had these franchises, but we were in the same franchise system. It was a franchise system specifically built for college students to learn how to be entrepreneurs called College Pro Painters. And
Oh, yeah.
we
I know
saw a
that one.
flyer in our dorm and we picked the flyer up and we're like, you know what? Instead of getting a job this summer and making $5 an hour somewhere, we're going to run our own painting franchises. And what happened is we had a general manager who, just like yourself, was a franchise coach who taught us how to do marketing, how to do estimates, how to do sales, how to hire employees, how to train employees, how to do payroll, how to do accounting, how to do all these things. And it was basically the school of hard knocks, figuring out how to become an entrepreneur. And
Mm-hmm.
I can attest for myself, and I don't want to speak for Rich, but I learned 100 times more running my own franchise in college than I did in actual college. And post college, it led us to a career of becoming part of the franchisor company where we would actually go hire 20 college students and teach them how to run a franchise in
Yep.
this industry. So that's a little bit of our background, which marries almost exactly to what your statement was.
John, I will say in defense of Stacey's point, I think our education and our success in that was very franchisor dependent. I think we were with a very organized franchisor who had very defined training systems with very committed coaches who had been promoted themselves from running a franchise themselves, who was backed by a publicly traded company with cash. There are a lot of nuances to that. I do think there's a reason why we haven't heard of 50 different student franchise companies. Like, what would that reason be that there aren't 50 out there that are competing for business? I think, frankly, we happen to get a little bit lucky by being with the franchisor we were with.
Yeah,
Well,
possibly.
plus, you two play a part in that, right?
Sure.
Like, if mom and dad go buy somebody a franchise at 18 out of high school instead of going to college, that's different than 2 college students who are like, I'm going to do this, I'm going to figure it out, I'm going to go for it. You guys have that drive. Not every student has that drive. And so I do think that there is an innate DNA in entrepreneurs.
Yeah, no question. I think I just want to come back to the statement, which is buy your kid a franchise instead of going to college. I actually think that's not a bad idea. If you have a student who's entrepreneurially driven and they're like, I don't really want to go do history class. Maybe they take college class. Maybe they take some accounting classes. They take some market. But at the end of the day, what they're going to learn by running, if they want to be an entrepreneur and they have the drive to be an entrepreneur, what they will learn by owning a franchise doesn't have to be a college specific student franchise. It could be a franchise in anything, pooper, scooper, whatever it is, window washing, you name it. They will learn so much more about life and entrepreneurism. And I think for me and for many people who have done that, once you become an entrepreneur and you have a tinge of success being an entrepreneur, now you have the confidence that you want to be an entrepreneur for life, and you don't need that job. So anyway, I just want to mention that, but I want.
Well, that's a really good point, because my own son, I think it depends on the parent too.
Sure.
Like, how much knowledge who is the I don't want to call him a child, who is the young adult going to turn to? And like you said, you guys had great coaches, but not every franchise is set up to coach to that degree. My mind kind of went two places. So first of all, if they want to buy a franchise that doesn't support that kind, if it's an ethical franchise, they're not going to accept them as a franchisee. So that's going to help, right? The second point is if the parent isn't an entrepreneur, then who is the student, the child, the young person going to turn to for advice? Because they're going to need somebody. Like my own son, I told him he had to go to college. He went half a year and dropped out. He's an entrepreneur now, right? Yep. And it's so much fun for me because we just get to talk back and forth about different business concepts.
Sure. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you're saying, hey, yeah, sure, there are some college students that are suited for it, but the blanket statement of let's replace college with entrepreneurism, it isn't for everyone. And exactly. Right in there is your unique value proposition as a coach, that you're saying, hey, maybe if you're one of our listeners and you are thinking, hey, I like that idea, give them a franchise instead of a college education, go to Stacey, because Stacey will have them do a core competency assessment, a motivator assessment, a personal financial assessment, and ensure that they are more likely to be the right fit with the DNA that it may work. So I think exactly. You're putting yourself in the exact right spot of the value proposition of vetting some potential college students. And obviously you also vet people who are mid-level management, have a 401k, don't make the mistakes I did. Let's use these assessments, that type of thing. Am I tracking with where your coaching goes?
Exactly. That's absolutely it. And then from there, we can narrow down what businesses fit. There's actually one other element that I always ask people to think about, and that's your why, right? Usually there's 4: money, fulfillment, freedom, and flexibility. And I typically find that when people want to leave, I've never worked with somebody, just full clarity, I've never worked with anyone right out of high school. That's never worked at some other job. So, but I find that the people that I work with, their why is generally falls in one of those 4 categories, usually a combination, but there's generally more one driver. So, for me, I never scratch that itch. I got to go scratch that itch. That was fulfillment, right? For many people, it is I'm making money for someone else and I haven't had a raise in 3 years. And I think that's a lot of this great resignation too, right? So that's the money part. Flexibility for those people who want to go see their kid play soccer at 3:00 in the afternoon and are in a corporate job that doesn't allow them to go do that. Is another reason that people want to start their own business. And then the freedom is just the idea that they can do what they want when they want, So there are franchises, if people are looking for freedom, there are franchises where the owner can be absent. So it's more like an investment, right? If you want flexibility, you can either hire employees, or if you own a business like a mobile pet grooming, I just saw one go by. You own a mobile pet grooming, right? You just block off your calendar for the days you don't want to work or you're not available to work. You're going to go to London for a week or whatever, right? So there are different types of businesses that support what people want to do. But I think in franchising, like I said in the beginning, I made the mistake of buying the wrong way. So I bought a music franchise because my son wanted to play in a band at 14, right? I mean, that was it. And I said, boy, if my son wants to do it, there have to be other kids that want to do it too. And it turned out just fine. But I am not a musician. I do not play an instrument. I'm tone deaf. I can't even sing and carry a tune, right? If somebody had walked me through the process, I don't know that I would have ended up with the same business. Maybe I would have, but it would have been a more knowledgeable decision, right? Because I didn't even know anything about franchises, quite frankly.
But Stacey, when you think about that, um, you followed a passion. And if you said, I just decided one day I woke up and I said, I saw this poster on the wall for a music business and bought a music business and I don't know why I bought a music business. I had no interest in it. You followed your heart and your passion and then put everything behind it. Whether you like music, don't like music, to me, that's almost irrelevant. I understand that you could have been guided differently, but like I almost look at that and go, I'm happy that you did that. I mean, to a certain degree,
Oh, I'm happy I
you
did
then had
it
a
too, but I
purpose.
got lucky.
You had a why. You had your family, and there was kind of like, so to me, I love that. But I do understand that one comment you made earlier is the franchise is the original done for you business. But I think what we've been talking about the last 20 minutes is, well, not all franchises are equal because some of them support you, some of them don't support you, some of them might be better suited for this person, some of them are better suited for that person. And so I think what you're referring to here, maybe a little bit more, is by getting the proper coaching in advance and getting core competency and a motivator assessment and a PFS assessment, and then understanding your real why of the 4 whys, we can potentially help understand more about you. You can help understand more about you. So when you do move into this entrepreneur world as a franchisee, you're going to where it's best suited for you. Is that kind of
Exactly? That's exactly it. Because oftentimes, here's an example. A guy bought a music school because he loves music and he wants to play music. But owning a music school, you aren't really in the music business. You're in the child enrichment business.
Mhm.
And that means you're dealing with helicopter moms who think their kid is a savant and is going to be the next fill in the blank. And you have to manage that relationship with mom when child isn't as good as mom thinks child is.
Yep.
Or when the other end of the spectrum is when mom is completely absent and doesn't pick the child up on time. It's everything about that, but it's more about the child and the parent than it is about the music for the owner of the business.
Sure. Yeah.
So he was very disappointed in his purchase because I think he thought he was going to hang out with the teachers and jam. So it's important to understand what you enjoy, but it's even more important to understand if that business that you're thinking about is going to deliver that. Even if it wasn't a franchise, teaching music is different than playing music.
Sure.
No, yeah. I think
Marketing
that
a music business is different than teaching a guitar lesson.
That concept is fascinating. I want to highlight it and then ask you to expand on it for other examples. Is like I just wrote down in my notes, what's the real business? And often it's not the product or service, it's not the widget. And you're saying in the music business, if you're going to get a music franchise, you better be passionate about child enrichment, not just music. It'd be nice if you liked music, but you better be passionate about child enrichment.
Yeah, if you dislike music, you'll be miserable because you're going to listen to bad music at certain times all day because you've got beginner musicians. So
can you expand on this to other products or services where you go, hey, I have advised people in my coaching experience and people about franchises, this business isn't really that, it's actually this. Are there other kind of go-tos in your mind that you work with people on so they really understand what they're getting into, which may not be the product or service at the end of the day? What are other examples?
I think pretty much all of them, but a couple examples are if you're an extrovert, you do not want to have a work from home mobile business because you'll never talk to anybody. You'll be miserable, right? You'll talk to people when they call up and say, can you come service me and how much do you cost? However, most people are going to want to do that online now. So there's very little interaction. So if you're an extrovert, that's, even if you own it, it's not going to make you happy. If you hate sales, let's say you're like, I cannot see myself selling anything, and I can't afford a salesperson, right, to start with, right? Well, you are not going to want to get into something like real estate, because it's it's a short sales cycle these days, but it used to be a long sales cycle. But you had to, you have to meet people at different times of the day and take them through houses and like engage with them. And if you don't like to sell, then what are you going to say at the end? You got to close the deal, So there are those are a couple of examples, but I think that's why just starting with you and then narrowing down, there are over 4,000 franchise brands right now. It's insane. But I think this industry has actually gone in a direction that is good, in that it used to just be pretty much brick and mortar, and then they started some other types online. And now there's part-time, full-time, work from home, brick and mortar, absentee owner. So where they used to say there was something for everyone, I feel like now that's even more true.
I think part of the problem that we're having, though, by having so many, potentially goes back to the other issue we addressed, which is way too many franchises claim that they are a done-for-you business, but they're really not. They're just trying to scale their model, and so that's got to be an area too where I'm assuming coaches and consultants can help protect new time entrepreneurs. Be like, hey, why don't you go with a proven system that's been out there, that has experience, that isn't just going to sell you a bill of goods and then it's not a done for you business, it's go figure it out business, right?
Yeah, well, and that's a good point too, because then I failed to mention we also have a risk assessment. Because then we're going to get into things like, do you want a startup? Do you want to buy a startup franchise, or do you want to buy an established franchise?
Sure.
Again, pros and cons to each. I started with a startup. Royalties were lower. 10-year agreement, so they couldn't raise it for 10 years, right? But it was a startup, and how many startups fail?
Yep.
Right? So then you look at, well, if they've been in business for 20 years, they've got a better track record. However, they're probably going to have higher royalties, and they're going to be less flexible.
Yep. Yeah, I relate that to, do you want to buy a McDonald's? Do you want to buy a John's Burgers?
Right.
John's Burgers is going to be low royalty. Go figure it out on your own. But McDonald's is going to be high cost, to get in. And once you're in, you better make the fries the same way. You're in trouble. Totally.
Right.
You mentioned earlier, and I want to just dive into this. The biggest struggle is what you don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And whether you're a franchise entrepreneur or just a startup entrepreneur or an entrepreneur that's running your business right now, you gave us a really good example with risking it all versus getting some leverage, other people's money, local banks versus national banks. What would be other examples of things that you see a lot with entrepreneurs that it's part of a struggle because they just don't know? They haven't been there before, or they haven't experienced it. What are some other key examples you've run into a lot?
Oh my gosh, the number one, don't believe what you read on the internet. It's unteaching bad information is quite a thing. Of course, there's proper information online too, but if you don't know what you don't know who's telling the truth and who isn't. I mean, even in the franchise industry, a statistic came out maybe 6 years ago that talked about how franchises fail at a lower rate than non-franchises. And since then, it's been documented that that's not true. And yet, many, many, many franchise consultants still have it on their website. Many reporters pick it up and include it in an article.
Sure.
And there's an element of truth to it, right? So there are a couple of studies but they're from different people also. But one says that franchise business, one year in business, less of them, and I don't remember the exact statistics off the top of my head, but after 1 year, more franchisees are still in business than startups. After 5 years, more franchises are still in business versus startups. But when you hit the 10-year mark, it's the same.
Oh, wow.
Right? So it's not exactly a wrong statistic, but it's a misleading statistic.
Mm. At the core of what you do, my understanding from what you said earlier is education and self-awareness. And I've heard a couple of tools that you use uh, in your repertoire for education and self-awareness. One is those three assessments: the core competency, the motivator, and personal financial assessment. A second one I heard is the four categories of why, and having people really understand what their why is, because there are different businesses which support different whys. The third thing I heard is a risk assessment, so that you can look at an established franchisor versus more of a startup franchisor. Can you give a few more examples of tools that you use when someone engages you on how you work with them on education and self-awareness in addition to those three?
Yeah. So we go, thank you for asking that. So we go through those assessments, and then we talk about the four motivators. And then based on that, we start looking at different categories. So like, okay, so now we know how much you can afford. We know that money is your motivator, but we also know that you're very low risk, right? So then we'll look at 18 industries. There's probably, hundreds if you but we look at 18 industries and talk about which ones just are of interest to the entrepreneur. Because if you're not interested, that's not going to be good, right? So which ones of interest? And then in each of those industries, then we start looking at them and saying, okay, which ones of these fit into your framework? And then we look at things like long term, right? Do you want a 5-year franchise or a 10-year franchise? Here's the pros and cons to each one. But if I'm 62, right? So if I go buy a franchise, I don't want a 20-year franchise because I don't want to be working, I don't think, in 20, or I might be dead in 20 years, who knows? But the point being, are you looking for a shorter term commitment or a longer term commitment? If you're new to franchising, you may say, oh, I only want to do 5 years, right? What is your long-term goal? So for example, let's say that you do want to eventually own a large franchise, but you can't afford it now. It's like buying starter homes. You buy a home that you can afford, you hold on to it, you improve it, and then you flip it and you buy a bigger, more expensive home, right? So that is also something we talk about. If just because you can't afford what you ultimately want now doesn't mean that you can't ever afford it. We'll just start with a starter business, okay? And then, do you like to be a big fish in a small pond or a small fish in a big pond? Because what I discovered is initially I was like, oh, this is such a great idea. It's a great way to teach music. I'm going to own 50 of them from Minnesota to Texas, right? So I had 3 of them. And when I had 3, I didn't know any of the kids. I didn't know any of the parents. I was just running a business. And franchises like to say, don't work in your business, work on your business. I wanted to work in my business. So having 3 turned out to be not what I was looking for. I didn't know it at the time, right? But that's not what because money wasn't my motivator again. Fulfillment was my motivator. So do you want to be a big fish in a small pond? Meaning take all the money that you have and put it into the franchise that you can afford. Or you could buy a $15,000 franchise and buy 10 of them, and as an example, right? Now you're going to be a super big fish in that pond, right? Because you're going to own multiple locations. And franchisors love multi-unit owners. I mean, it's easy to understand why. They have fewer people to teach and train and hold hands with,
Yeah, absolutely. Got it. So if I kind of map out what your process is, and I'm assuming our listeners are going to get benefit from understanding your process and maybe explore a few components themselves or possibly reach out to you for guidance, it's take a look at those assessments, look at the categories of why, then you look at 18 industries and you kind of filter those to look at the industry. Then you look at long-term goals to consider the tenure of the agreement that's suitable based on long-term goals. Then you look at what's their preference to work in the business or on the business. And the example you gave is big fish in a small pond or small fish in a big pond. And then ultimately you vet things by the risk assessment of a large franchisor versus smaller franchisor. Does that roughly encapsulate your process when you work with someone who's exploring franchises?
yes.
Makes sense.
So it's just everything is just understanding the person and what motivates you. Because in the end, it's all about being happy and successful. That's all.
What percentage of the people who you work with pre-franchise franchisee do you then continue to coach when they become a franchisee, or is your business pretty exclusively pre-purchase?
It's mainly pre. I
Okay.
only have about 5 people that I coach on a regular month-to-month basis. Um, we've talked about that as an expansion area, but really I'm more focused on helping people separate, filter whether it's either an entrepreneurship or a franchise is a good option for them.
The franchise owner pays you directly, correct?
Correct. The entrepreneur pays me directly, not the franchisor.
Yeah, got it. So, and that's part of the, again, unique value proposition that you have is you're not swayed by how much money you get from which franchisor for your recommendation, which a typical franchise consultant will tell you they're not, but they may be. It's hard to turn down more money for the same amount of work. Where you're saying, hey, I'm not sure I care what I genuinely don't care. I'm making my money because you're paying me. I genuinely do not care whether you get a franchise or not, or which franchise it is. My job is really to help you hone in on, is this right for you and which franchise is right for you? And I think that's a great service that many people considering franchises could use.
Exactly, because and a matter of fact, I work with several franchise consultants and they appreciate the role I play as well. Because even the good, ethical, I'm only going to sell you what will be good for you consultants, they can spend up to a year educating a client or a prospect, and then that prospect walks away and they make no money.
Yeah.
So they are now referring people to me who have never owned a franchise before, so that I can, because I've consolidated all of this into like a 30-day program, right? So in 30 days, they'll know whether they want a franchise or not, and then they'll go back to the consultant to find the franchise. So that's why franchise consultants refer people to me, because if/when they go back to them, then they're more knowledgeable, and so the time to sale is shorter.
Stacey, thank you for being on this morning, describing what you do and getting into some of the details of it. Much appreciate your wisdom that you shared today.
I appreciate you guys for putting this show on for everybody to learn over and over. And I learn a lot by listening to your program as well. So thank you for what you guys do.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacey. Please stick around for a few more minutes while Rich and I break down this episode.
John, this was right in my wheelhouse. You're talking education and self-awareness. I could have talked with Stacey and listened to her for another hour.
Yeah, no doubt. Also hits, franchising, which you know pretty well. So a lot of the content, you've seen a lot of franchisees through the system that you work with as well, and how they came to find CertaPro and what their why was and what their assessments were. So I'm sure this was close to you. And certainly hit us as well. It's different statements. Like I had a lot of fun just talking about really should young entrepreneurs do a franchise instead of college degree, and there certainly is a large population today that is looking at how much it costs to go to traditional college and the amount of money that takes versus maybe getting that education a different way. And we have certainly a lot of really well-known entrepreneurs in our society today that never graduated college but actually got their MBA of running a business. And I'm a true proponent of that. It actually started me thinking about, as my kids get a little bit older, or as friends of my kids get older, how can they get involved to get a taste of entrepreneurism at a young age? I love that idea. And I don't think there's really a lot of franchises out there for young entrepreneurs. But whether you're young or you're middle-aged, like there's always a good opportunity to say, you know what? I want more money. I want more fulfillment. I want more freedom. I want more flexibility. Nothing like COVID actually highlighted that more to people. So I'm pretty sure Stacey's busy with a lot of people kind of looking at, maybe I should look at this. And if you are going to look at it, definitely go with a coach, not a consultant. I think we've identified that as a really good path because a consultant has a vested interest in selling you a franchise. I think where Stacey's really more in tune with, is a franchise right for you? And if so, which direction you should go?
Almost like looking at a financial advisor and finding out, do you get compensated on making the recommendation from the place where you place my money? Or are you going to take it from me as it grows? And you almost prefer to go with somebody that they take it from you as it grows because they have that vested interest in you. And they're not going to be swayed by how much they're getting paid from what company. You said it made you think of your kids. Yep. And I got to say, obviously, same thing with me. So I'm thinking, our 19-year-old Kaylin, who did go the military route, which Stacey is, formerly 10 generations in the military. When Kaylin said she didn't want to go to college, she was tired of sitting in classrooms. It was too much theory. Embarrassingly, it never occurred to me, John, to go, hey, you know what? Why don't we consider maybe a franchise? Maybe getting into a business at 18 years old is a thing for you. She found her way into the military because she wanted to travel and she felt it had lots of options. Today, I say that was the right choice for her. It was terrific. But it does feel a little embarrassing to go, I didn't even consider, could we get her in a franchise instead of a college? And I'm certainly going to consider that with our next two kids who are going to be moving out of school over the years to come.
Yeah, I mean, certainly, I think whether you're an entrepreneur today or not, I think the society is moving to be more entrepreneurial. And so, continuing to develop those skill sets starting to develop those skill sets at a young age is really, really important. But, nonetheless, I think one of the things too that we talked about in this conversation with Stacey that I think was another highlight to her as a coach, but it's also as your local banker, or you just mentioned financial advisors, or, whomever you're working with, finding people that have a vested interest to help you find your path and what's best for you without a conflict of interest on the other side is sometimes hard to find. I think I know a lot of current entrepreneurs who feel lonely. They're running their own business. They really don't have any, good advisors that have a vested interest in their business, not a conflict. And so one of the things I love about, again, what Stacey does, but also other advisors you can find in your business life, if you don't have a well-surrounded team of advisors, whether it be financial advisors, CPA, bank advisors, whatever it may be, you need those people around you to guide you and help you identify your whys and identify maybe where you're weak and help, support you and put you in the right direction. I think Stacey is a really good example of that.
I know there are listeners who are probably second guessing the business that they've chosen to be in. And there's an element of, hey, have some grit, push through it. There are tough times. Continue to move on. And then there are some that are like, maybe you should have an opportunity to objectively evaluate, are you in the right place for you? I would advise people who are in that place, it's possible to go to somebody like Stacey and really get a fresh look. You don't have to stop. You don't have to quit your job. You don't have to have made a decision. You don't have to quit your business. You don't have to close it down. You can be curious while you're in your current business and go, I'm curious about that core competency assessment, the motivator assessment, personal financial, my why, the 18 industries. Am I even in the right industry? Is this the right one for me? So worst case scenario, that would be validating for someone to dig in and have grit. You're in the right industry. This fulfills your why. You have the core competencies. Keep plowing forward. That would be like the worst case scenario. Like, it didn't do anything other than give you confidence. That's not a bad worst case scenario. The other side of the coin is maybe you find out your gut is right. You're not in the right place based on what you want today, and you are kind of feeling it, and this may validate that as well.
Yeah, I think it's very deep what you just came through right there, right? Like, a lot of people, when they're not having success in their business, maybe when the business gets tough, they may assess, well, am I in the right spot? That crisis of meaning moment, right? Like, okay, is this the right thing for me? Am I in the right spot? Having a coach like Stacey may identify, yeah, you are. And maybe if you're not, maybe that's the time to flip out and do something that maybe is more fulfilling or provides you more money or more freedom or more flexibility. But I think a lot of it has to do with, to the point you just made, you may be in an industry like music, to use that as an example, and realize, I really don't like music. But are you really in the music business? Or are you in the child enrichment business? Or are you in the supply and demand? I'm a business owner. Let me own 20 of these things. I don't care what the product or service is. I'm going to bring fundamental business practices to these things. So I know a lot of entrepreneurs that are in industries they don't really have a passion for, but they're really good at running businesses. And they let the people on the ground actually who have passion doing that service or product, execute that. So I think you identified a really good point, or Stacey did, which is, you got to differentiate sometimes why you're doing this. And if you're doing it for fulfillment because you love music, then go run one music franchise and work in it. But if you're doing it because you want to be an entrepreneur and you want money and flexibility and freedom, you can own any franchise and really deploy entrepreneurial skills to that. It doesn't really matter what the actual business is. So really good differentiation there, and really good idea for people to just reassess themselves along their journey.